All right, we're back for round. I think this is number 3 of this with Doug Rohan of Rohan Law. Late last night, Florida State amended their complaint to the ACC or toward the ACC, and we're going to talk about a little bit of what happened. But Doug, we were just talking before we went live, and it seems like the gloves are off now, as maybe the biggest part of this. So. We won't go line by line necessarily because I believe they added 59 pages to the complaint, so we won't keep people for the next 6 hours. But overarching thoughts on the gloves coming off here.
I'm so excited. TJ, thank you for having me on again. I was originally not sure I was going to do this. I had some other obligations at work, but once I started reading through the complaint and getting a sense for what was coming through in this amended complaint, it just got me really excited. So often in litigation, people talk a big game, maybe they put out some points, but then when the litigation starts, it's kind of more subdued. They kind of take a step back, and FSU has not done that today. As you say, the gloves are off. They're emptying the chamber. They are coming after the Swafford family, and there is no place to hide for the ACC in this. And this is just, I know I'm a homer. I know this is an FSU podcast, but man, this was a lot of fun and very entertaining to read through.
So let's jump through some of it. And I appreciate you again for making time and jumping on and telling some of that work stuff to hit the road until later today. So let's start from the beginning. Constitution, the bylaws of the ACC set the standard for excellence, and it seems like a standard that the ACC has failed to measure up to, failed to realize. Conversely, kind of maybe combine a couple of these, they claimed, and we talked about this in our last video, so if you guys haven't seen that, I'll link the playlist above. You can go check those out in order and then come back to this one. But they claimed that Florida State had kind of failed on their fiduciary duty. Florida State came back and said, we don't have any fiduciary duty. Like we just exist in this conference, and meagerly at this point. But Florida State snapped back at that.
Look, as we talked about before, and please do go watch those earlier videos. Look, I'm not suggesting that the legal team is watching, any of these videos, but it's reassuring to know that every single point that we talked about has now been readdressed and revisited in just the way that we talked about in that first video. But what's exciting here is that, again, in the amended complaint, as we talked about before, that's very standard procedure. They're going through and shoring up and adding to some of their prior arguments, and then addressing the arguments of the ACC without actually filing an answer, as the ACC will do in this case. But what they're saying is what we talked about before. The ACC alleged in their amended filing in North Carolina that Florida State breached its fiduciary duty. And in this case, we talked about the fact that there is no fiduciary duty on the part of Florida State to the ACC. One of my favorite lines, and I mentioned it down further in the notes, is the ACC exists solely on behalf and in order to represent its members under the direction and control of its members, and not the other way around. So here, the ACC trying to allege that FSU has done something wrong is just an absurdity. And so they've gone through and said, there is no agreement in place anywhere of confidentiality, of fiduciary duty from Florida State's part to the ACC. Now, let me be clear. It is part of the responsibility in the agreement for the ACC not to or for Florida State not to intentionally harm the ACC. You can't go around talking about what a bad commissioner you have if there isn't some other reason for that. So there is a duty of Florida State as a member institution to help support generally the conference. But now that we've entered into this litigation phase, there absolutely is nothing that stops us from legally stating in these documents how the ACC has harmed Florida State.
Yeah, you can't come back and say, well, you accusing me of my wrongdoings is hurting my image, and what you did hurt your image. That's a very
Precise.
Secondary thing. Talking a lot about media, tier 1 and tier 2 rights are now front and center. Tier 2 was something that Florida State is alleging was discounted by the ACC to ensure that Raycom survived. That started the underperformance of the conference all the way back in 2002. This alleges even back in 2012, there was a $6.5 million revenue gap and now that's ballooned up to well over 100 million, according to the Charlotte Observer. The Swaffords got named in this as part of a, I don't know, it's been message board conspiracy for a long time. It's not really message board conspiracy, according to Florida State.
Yeah, I love Irish Affel did a great job when he reported this late last night and put out some initial thoughts about this litigation. That's exactly right. These are the same things that we have been talking about on the message boards and conspiracies and hinting at, oh, this must have been something that was done for the benefit of the Swaffords. And of course, on a message board, you can say whatever you want. This is a legal filing. This is a presentation to the court of the facts as Florida State interprets them. This has sprung off of the message boards and turned into legitimate legal arguments as to why the ACC was not acting in the best interest of Florida State. And this is one of the things that I was so proud about in our first interview when we talked about this, because we discussed this point specifically. The
Yeah.
ACC bundled all of the rights of all the member institutions in order to allegedly negotiate the most comprehensive, robust, valuable package that they could negotiate with ESPN. And now we have direct quotes in newspaper articles from that time saying that the priority for the ACC was ensuring Raycom survival, which happens to have an element of nepotism included because we're talking about Chad Swafford, the brother of the then commissioner, John Swafford.
How, you know, it's hard to ask, but I'm going to ask you to be unbiased for a minute. How bad does that look? Take off the Florida State hat for just a minute. How bad does that look?
I mean, this is bad. This is as bad as it gets. Absent having a text message saying, "I don't care about our members. I only care about the ACC." That would be the smoking gun. Absent having that, it doesn't matter what people say. It's what they do, and the actions belie, another SAT word of the day. The actions show what the ACC intended, and they intended to support Raycom and its future existence over negotiating a more robust and financially beneficial contract on behalf of the member institutions.
So, 2011 is when the ACC amended its constitution to add the 1.25 withdrawal penalty. 2012 then saw ESPN negotiate a 15-year contract based on this withdrawal penalty for rights through, we're coming up on it, 2027. Follow-up article pointed out that the ACC ESPN deal was outdated before it even took effect. The ACC deal was worth $155 million. The Pac-12 deal followed up with a $250 million deal. Basically, the ACC then locked its members in by ratcheting the withdrawal penalty up to 240%. Thoughts, we've talked a little bit about that and, the justification for ratcheting withdrawal penalties up and liquidated damages and a bunch of things there. But I think the ACC is showing by its own actions there, and I won't speak for you, that it knew that this was just junk and needed to lock people in as tough as they could.
No, you said it exactly perfectly. The ACC knew, and that's the hardest thing to show in litigation. Everything is speculative when it comes to business. Everything is speculative on what the future performance is going to be. And the ACC's best and safest argument is, oh, we didn't realize that this area of media rights and expansion of rights and contracts was going to explode the way it did. That would normally be the ACC's strongest argument. But here you have a 2012 contract for 1.555 million, and then immediately after that you have the Pac-12 going to $255 million, and the ACC's response was not to go back to ESPN and be like, "Hey, look, I know this is a contract, but we've got to renegotiate this. I'm sorry we didn't see what was coming forward." No, instead they just operated to lock in its members by tripling that payout revenue that you needed in order to leave the ACC. So the ACC was not admitting its failures. The ACC was not recognizing its failure to anticipate. And on top of that, it wasn't like it was over 10 years that we saw this huge transition. This was the very next year that the Pac-12 entered this contract. So that's where the ACC has a huge problem in this. And again, as I said from the very beginning, I'm very excited at the strength of what the FSU is alleging in these complaints.
Hey, we'll get right back to Doug Rohan of Rohan Law in just a moment, but I'm going to show you something at the end of the video. It's our brand new national channel, College Football Addiction. Last night, UNC's Board of Trustees basically echoed what Florida State said back in August. I made a video about it and I put it on our national channel. I'm going to link it above right now and at the end of the video. So finish watching my chat with Doug and then go check out what UNC's Board of Trustees means and said and what it means for conference realignment after the video is done. Thank you guys for your support. Make sure you subscribe to that new channel at the end of the video. Now, also in the complaint, they were talking about the cost to the schools for production, significantly higher for the ACC schools over the SEC schools. So not only are they not getting paid the same, their out-of-pocket expenses are much higher. Swofford then commissioned his own media consultant to pacify its members about the competitive nature of the contracts. Swofford assured that the ACC would not get left behind.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what the allegation is regarding the fiduciary and whether or not ACC knew or should have known about this shortfall. So here again, the actions of the commissioner show they knew perfectly well they were in trouble. So Swofford commissions his own media consultant, shocker that it might be biased in favor of the ACC, to say, no, this deal isn't as bad as you all think it is already in 2012, 2013. And not only that, but I guarantee, here's the fiduciary duty, here's the allegation that we are going to operate on your behalf. I guarantee that we are not going to be left behind. And that's exactly what happened over the succeeding 10, 15 years. The ACC has objectively been left behind, mathematically has been left behind. And that's, again, what's included in this amended complaint is some additional financial detailings showing exactly how soon that discrepancy began to grow and where that discrepancy is today and where that discrepancy is going to be by 2036. Again, another thing that they point out here is there are at least two more opportunities for ESPN and the SEC, ESPN and the Big 12, Pac-12, Big Ten now to renegotiate their interest before the ACC has a chance to renegotiate its media deal at the end of 2036. So not only has there been exponential growth in the media markets, but there's going to be two more opportunities for the other Power 2 conferences to renegotiate that deal with ESPN before this 4.5% ridiculous escalation continues or changes to something more financially beneficial for the ACC.
Yeah, mentioned that specifically. Florida State says that the ACC, the records show that the ACC never renegotiated any additional revenue from ESPN. They haven't since May of 2012. The ACC Tier 2 and Tier 3 right with Raycom and subsequently Fox Sports doomed the ACC network to failure. While all of this is happening, again, we get back into the nepotism. Chad Swofford was promoted to VP and general manager of Raycom, basically Florida State alleges, kept Raycom alive with the deal.
So this is a fascinating nugget that's in here is we're talking about now the contract for the Tier 2 and Tier 3 rights. So ESPN gets all of the Tier 1 games. Tier 2 and Tier 3 are relegated to Raycom at a sweetheart deal that is far below market value. Now Raycom, knowing it needs to increase its revenue, is now subleasing some of its games to Fox Sports, the competitor of ESPN.
Yeah.
So here you have the situation of showing that Raycom knew very well what they were doing, the ACC knew very well what they were doing, and ESPN knew very well what they were doing. And who didn't have a voice in all of these contracts? It was FSU. And then you add to that the idea that this 2012 ESPN agreement had a subsequent 2013 contract signed by Florida State, had a subsequent 2016 contract signed by Florida State at the behest of the commissioner. And in neither of those contract negotiations between the ACC and Florida State was a single dollar of revenue added by ESPN.
So there's been a lot of pivoting just a little bit. There's been a lot of talk about, one of the ACC's complaints in their last filing 2 weeks ago when we talked about it was that Florida State broke some confidentiality. Florida State went back at that and said, no, we didn't, based essentially just, sunshine laws and different things that we've talked about on here make things pretty public record, but they basically came back and said, you guys filed first. You're the ones that put all this out in the air, which we'll talk about them filing first in just a moment from another angle. But pretty hilarious that Florida State said, it's not me, it's you, with
Look,
putting all this out in the air.
yeah, we talked about how the ACC did file some of their exhibits under seal, and we talked about those efforts to keep that information private. But again, the ACC can't get out of its own way. So here, their second strongest argument about how Florida State is damaging its reputation and airing their dirty laundry is eliminated by the fact that the ACC rushed out to try to file their lawsuit first. So how can then ACC claim that Florida State is breaching its duty that doesn't exist, as we've covered, by airing its dirty laundry when at 4:55 p.m. on the day before, the ACC filed its lawsuit airing all of the dirty laundry that Florida State was about to present.
Why do you think they did that? There's a word we'll talk about here
Mhm.
in this, but why did the ACC do this?
So in our past videos, that was one of the hot topics that I truly didn't have an answer for. And attorneys are experts. Attorneys know a lot of things, but we don't know everything about all things. So I was truthful to your viewers that there really wasn't a whole lot that I knew in terms of the issue of filing first. So I went ahead and did some additional digging, read up some additional articles, and was reminded about something from my law school days 25 years ago now. But that's the issue of comity. There is a legal objective term out there that does relate to filing a lawsuit first. This idea of comity is that if you have two competing lawsuits that are both filed relatively simultaneous and they also talk about the exact same things, then the earlier filed lawsuit can take the priority. Now, the judge, again, has the right to determine whether or not comity is met. So the Florida judge has the right to determine whether or not the ACC filing does have this comity aspect to it. But the exception to that is when somebody files a fraudulent or premature action just for the purpose of exercising comity. And that's going to be the argument in Tallahassee as to why the ACC filing is not entitled to this perception of being filed first, because again, they did this before the Board of Trustees voted. And secondarily, this is another great nugget. I tried to do some quick research because one of your Twitter followers did bring this up, and I wanted to give him or her credit for it. I will find out and remember who that is in the next few days and give him a shout out on Twitter. But the issue was that there was litigation initiated by the ACC in their declaratory judgment action without a vote from the members. And
Yeah.
that was a breach of the bylaws and constitution of the ACC because their requirement is to publicize a meeting and then at that meeting vote on it. And the ACC failed to do that. So all this rush to be first for a fraudulent purpose, I think is going to again give us reason why Tallahassee is not going to let go of this complaint, and Tallahassee will ultimately hear this case in Florida.
Yeah, we had speculated about that. We had wondered about that. There were questions that came out on that. I talked with people on December 23rd when the filing happened, or when the Board of Trustees, when we got the word that the lawsuit had or the complaint had been filed by the ACC. Well, did they call a vote on this? Did the other, who doesn't have our back in this conference? Like obviously plenty of people, but why was there no vote called? And so it's good again that Florida State. Speculation a month and a week ago, but Florida State certainly did call that out and say like, hey, you got to call a meeting on this. This isn't, you're not allowed to just do things as a member of the conference or as the conference without, involving the members in a vote. So, all right. Any other high level thoughts? Anything else kind of on your mind with this? Does this potentially change anything? Is anything really much different now? We're still kind of in wait and see mode for some answers for the First Amendment. Does anything about timelines or anything shift? Do you feel like we're, still drudging towards a settlement, less drudging towards a settlement? I've seen some speculation that maybe this won't end in a settlement because people think that Florida State wouldn't have taken the gloves off this hard if they were closer to negotiating to a settlement. Does your mind change there at all? Do you have any other feelings on where you think this lies, or what's your overarching kind of bow on this thing?
So yeah, as we've discussed before, I believe all litigation ultimately is moving towards settlement, some type of joint resolution. It's very rare that things end up in trial. I think it's an interesting perspective that this is Florida State essentially saying, the gloves are off, we're emptying the clip, we're entering the UFC cage match to talk about the actual details with Swafford and the nepotism. But perhaps one option is the ACC simply wasn't being reasonable. A lot of times parties are in an echo chamber, they hear their own attorneys talking, they talk themselves up about how strong their position is, and sometimes a slap on the face like this amended complaint is what's needed in order to bring the party to a more reasonable position at the bargaining table. So I still think that this is ultimately something that is going to result in a resolution of a compromise, of some kind of settlement, because again, Florida State is starting to make very clear they have the ammunition they need to put the ACC in a position where they were ineffectual, and that would result in the breach of fiduciary duty claim being upheld, the breach of contract duty being upheld, and at the end of the day, there could be a $0 verdict in favor of Florida State. I think with each amended complaint, with each revelation, that is becoming more and more likely, and it's going to be up to the ACC and the commissioner to understand that finally, for the attorneys to reveal that, and for them to be much more reasonable in terms of what they're willing to accept before this goes much further in litigation.
Awesome. Well, Doug, I appreciate you a ton for making time today, for stopping by today, clearing some stuff off your calendar and doing this pretty quickly. ACC's got to drop this stuff around noon. Florida State's got to drop this stuff around noon, not like 9 p.m. anymore, so that we have articles coming out. Ira did a great job at 11:30 at night. I can't. Their hours are backwards, so I'll try and get Florida State on that. But tell people a little bit about Rohan Law again before we get out of here.
Sure. We're out of the Atlanta area, specializing in personal injury, workers' comp, criminal defense. We want to be your best friends on your worst day. The Atlanta Seminole Club is the largest Seminole organization outside of the state of Florida. So as always, if you want a Nole to come alongside you through some challenging times, if you've been arrested or if you've been injured through the negligence of someone else, we want to be that attorney that comes alongside you for that difficult time. So reach out to our office. We always offer free consultation. Follow us on social media. Follow us on Twitter. I'm sure my marketing team is unhappy with how much my Twitter is related to FSU stuff, but they'll get over it. At the end of the day, it's about engagement. I love getting to know your followers and your members. And at the end of the day, having a personal relationship with an attorney is going to be much more valuable than any billboard you pass as you're driving down the road.
Yeah, if you guys aren't following Rohan Law on Twitter, all the links are in the description, but give him a view over there, a like and a follow for sure. One of the best FSU Twitter followers on there, and you get a little legal expertise on situations like this as well. Doug, I appreciate it a ton, man. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure, TJ. Take care.
Take care, bro. Appreciate Doug Rohan of Rohan Law for jumping on with us. Hey, if you watched this entire video, you are a diehard in this conference realignment stuff. We started a new channel. It is a national channel that kind of gives me an opportunity to take a look at some of these issues that are not necessarily Florida State related. For example, UNC's Board of Trustees just came out with some info last night that I did a video on. I don't know if that would fit on a Florida State channel, so I put it on the national channel. Content will not slow down. It will not stop. My baby is always going to be Florida State. But if you are interested in maybe my perspective on a national college football channel, or just want some more conference realignment news that impacts Florida State but isn't directly related to Florida State, go check that out. I've linked the specific UNC video on the screen right now. Do me a favor. Go watch that, subscribe to the channel, show some support. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. I appreciate Doug for his time today as well. Talk to you guys all soon. Click the video on the screen right now. Go Noles.